in the program so that others can join us when we cannot wait for, we have. Hello, can you hear me? All right. On that note, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of our public lecture. Let me hand over to the technical secretary, Engineer Felix Omombale, who will in turn introduce the lecture and introduce our guest speaker for today's lecture. My name is Engineer Ben Osi Oko. The technical secretary, please, can you take over from here?
Yeah, good afternoon, distinguished engineers. Welcome to the 7th edition of our public lecture. So, and the presentation for today is on tools for urban revitalization, infrastructure upgrades, and generating private sector funding. And our resource person is no other person than Dr. Zerry Ihekwaba, PhD, is a professional engineer and also a deputy city manager, City of Miami, Florida. Dr. Zerry Ihekwaba is the Chief of Infrastructure for the City of Miami, Florida, USA. In this role, he is functionally tasked with the management and operation of the city in the area of policy implementation, establishing service levels and delivery, as well as coordination of its infrastructure development. Dr. Ihekwaba is licensed as a professional engineer in several jurisdictions, including the states of Florida and Georgia, USA, province of Ontario, Canada, and in Nigeria, Nigeria Society of Engineers and the Council for the Regulation of Engineering in Nigeria. He is a civil engineering graduate of University of Nigeria. He obtained both his master's and doctorate degrees in structural stroke materials engineering from Queen's University at Kingston, Ontario, Canada. He has an advanced certificate on pilot tube microtunneling and conventional microtunneling from the Microtunneling Research Institute of the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado, USA. He is also a graduate of the Academy SS cohort of the Academy for Strategic Management of the Florida International University, Miami, Florida. He received a post-crisis leadership certificate from the Moorman College of Business, University of South Florida, Tampa, Florida. Dr. Zerry Ihekwaba has taught classes as an adjunct faculty at the University of Miami in the departments of civil and architectural engineering. He has practical experience in both the public and private sectors, spanning over 38 years as part of the municipal leadership of the City of Miami since 2010. Dr. Ihekwaba is a key member of the crisis action team in the Emergency Operations Center and a leader in maintaining continuity of operations in response to major emergencies, hurricanes, spills, and flooding, etc. Dr. Ihekwaba is a foundation member of the Structural Engineering Institute of American Society of Civil Engineers. He has authored several peer-reviewed publications as a member of American Concrete Institute. He is also affiliated with the American Public Water Works Association and Florida Stormwater Association. He serves as a board member of the South Florida chapter of American Society of Public Administration. He is a proponent of initiative to protect all infrastructure and capital improvement from climate change, sea level rise, and other sustainability challenges. He served in the steering committee of the Resilience 305 program for the Greater Miami and Beaches, facilitated by the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities program, now known as Resilient City Network. Dr. Ihekwaba has been recognized by governmental and non-governmental entities for his professional leadership and community roles, and was recently recognized as the Engineer of the Year in 2022. Dr. Zerry, member of the corner of the prestigious Leadership Florida, a statewide community of leaders. Members join me as I welcome our resource person, Dr. Zerry Ihekwaba, as the resource person for today. Thank you. Yes, sir, you can go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay. Let me thank the leadership of the Nigerian Society of Engineers for the opportunity to participate in this month's worthwhile endeavor to seek solutions for challenges of infrastructure in Nigeria. It has always been my desire to find opportunities like this to contribute. It's always better and gratifying to be on the side of positive opportunities rather than criticism. So on that note, I would like to thank the leadership. The next step is for me to proceed with the lecture. I crave your indulgence to be able to share my presentation through Zoom, if you don't mind. So I'm going to go ahead and take the initiative to share it so that you guys will be able to participate online. Give me 1 second, please. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me do a slideshow. Okay. So again, the topic and the subject of interest for today's presentation is tools for urban revitalization, infrastructure upgrades, and generating private sector funding for some of those major milestones and assets monitoring and asset management programs of interest. Again, my name is Zerry Ihekwaba. Most people probably call me here Zerry, although my full Nigerian name is Zerry Ihekwaba. I'm from Imo State. The concepts and tools for existing development, as well as concepts and tools for new development, are two, what I call the twin towers of asset management in the United States as we speak. So I'm going to dwell on those two concepts momentarily. You will ask yourself the question, why urban renewal or revitalization? Most of the assets we have today have been aged. Most cities, most urban centers in the United States have major assets that have been in existence since over 100 years. So we are well past their useful life. So we need a program of land development or redevelopment that addresses slum and blight or general urban decay in our cities, which will involve the elimination of those blighted areas, checking slum and creating opportunities for better housing, businesses and other developments. So our primary focus today will be to how do we attract external private and public investments and financing to restore economic viability, promote public health, safety, and welfare, which are the pinnacle and background and foundation of any useful and successful government. Which infrastructure upgrades will you be interested today in Nigeria? Obviously, we're going to look at the major assets, roadways, public spaces, which is in dire need in most urban centers in Nigeria, parks and recreation facilities, the water treatment, storage, and transmission system, Other than a couple of cities and urban centers in Nigeria, you don't see much of water treatment and storage and transmission. Sewage treatment, sanitary and stormwater sewer management systems, and of course, the big elephant in the room, which is the solid waste management facilities to address some of the litter and illegal dumping you experience as you traverse most of the Nigerian landscape. You probably need landfills, incinerators, and waste-to-energy programming. Most of our bridges and tunnels are being done by people who are not qualified to engage in such practices, and that's why you have a lot of failures of most of the infrastructure you see, either from the private sector or government initiated. Of course, seaports, railroads, and aviation facilities. The energy grids, telecommunications, and small cells. Small cells are the in thing today because everyone seems to be finding a back channel avenue for enhancing communication. So how do we engage and achieve infrastructure upgrades? Through finance infrastructure improvements, through public or private sector engagements, or a combination thereof. In my experience in the past 12 to 15 years in the city of Miami, funding success is dependent on life cycle analysis, right? To support a business case for a sustainable infrastructure investment, as well as asset management, to preserve value over time. This is actually what most financing entities are looking for. What is your business case, right? Now, okay, we need demand management analysis and gap assessments before we can engage in asset improvement strategies for investments. Most governmental entities, City of Miami is very, very successful in prioritizing and impactful infrastructure asset improvements. What are the low-hanging fruits? How do you focus on ones that will give you the biggest buck on the dollar? Then what? Let's call out the questions that you probably will be asking yourself today. Whether you live in Abuja or you live in Jos, Kanu, Kaduna, or Bomoshọ, or Owerri, in tough economic times, how much do we need? Where can we find the funds? Why isn't there more of it today? So these types of questions become more frequent and pressing if you're in leadership position and also in policy making. Public-private sides of the municipal process need to engage more and outside in them. You need to leverage on your existing networks in order to drive the process today. Some of the infrastructure investment strategies, which are funding vehicles with finite life, are favorites for private equity because they prefer value-adding investments. If I'm going to engage in any type of infrastructure improvement by funding it, I want to know the value that I'm adding, and I want to know what is the useful life for me to generate the payback period. So a core assets with long period life that generate returns primarily from income are some of the attractions of the desire. So investment managers focus on assets and development risks, which development cycle require protracted revenue stream. If you can develop a revenue stream that stretches through the useful life or the concession period, those are major attractions. And you may want to specialize your funding mechanism by geography or asset type. Whether you want to target transportation or water and energy, there are a lot of vehicles today that you can utilize. And Nigeria has a lot of technical personnel strewn all over the globe that can assist in driving the process, only if there is useful engagement. So we need to adopt a debt financing and infrastructure investments, perhaps tied to balance sheets of financial institutions in Nigeria or outside the country. I give you a quick synopsis as to the global scope as to what is the funding needs as of today. It is estimated that more than $96 trillion is required to fund infrastructure projects in the next 7 years. At present, the annual budget available for infrastructure funding worldwide is close to $2.5 trillion to $3 trillion. Where do you find such money? So there is a competition between the developed countries and the underdeveloped countries, or rather what I call ongoing developing countries, on how to access these funds. Public funding has always been the biggest source for infrastructure finance. Most countries spend between 5 to 14% of their GDP on developing as well as maintaining their infrastructure. Nigeria seems to be at the bottom of that rung. Why? That's what the question you should ask yourself. So in Nigeria, in lieu of depending on taxes, on petroleum receipts and revenues, we need to engage more in multi-sectoral revenue funding schemes, right? Wrong or wrong? I don't know. So this is where we call for proactive leadership. So I look at what we've been doing in the city of Miami in terms of private sector capital financing of our infrastructure. Cash flows from infrastructure assets are predictable. Cash flow from infrastructure assets, there is not enough of that in Nigeria. Are they of long duration? Are they indexed to inflation? Are they correlated with public equity markets? None of that has been addressed on a holistic level. Perhaps they are being addressed in major centers of Lagos or Abuja. But it needs to be strewn all over the entire country, right? Infrastructure investments are suited to portfolios of world and investment capital. Currently, the asset balance sheets of pension funds that we've been able to tap to in the US, from the public pension plans, you have available $4.2 trillion that you can access. In corporate pension funds, you have $1.5 trillion. In life insurance companies, these are assets that folks are holding that you can access in order to regenerate revenue for them, to pay out to their pensioners or perhaps to subscribers. In Nigeria, you have a challenge of accessing some of these investment portfolios because they're not open to public scrutiny, audit, or access for such investments. So we need to open up those ventures and you'll be able to see the inflow of capital for funding infrastructures. So even if you take 5% index to those asset portfolios to finance your infrastructure, you probably have about $1 trillion in the US alone every year. That's why a lot of cities have been successful in moving their infrastructural developments and improvements because they have the ability to access some of these funding mechanisms. In Nigeria, the corollary and some kind of challenges we have is that people create these asset portfolios, they keep it in the bank, which is open to what? I don't want to mention things that are very ugly. So don't keep them dormant in banks. Invest, invest, and invest. So a prudent allocation in financing with a good rate of return is better to listen it to fuel subsidy monkeys, snakes, and folks who stash them in cisterns and septic tanks. That is something that is really beyond the pale. So in terms of infrastructure funding, what are the true and tested sources that we've utilized in the city of Miami and elsewhere? Most private sectors really want to find their place in municipal development cycle. They want to understand municipal private business needs. They want to restructure the process to focus on private sector expectation. The public-private sector collaboration to combine findings into valuable insights are some of the actionable recommendations we want to focus on for successful deliveries. So we have had success in engaging the private sector, and I'm going to give you ample examples of some of the delivered projects today that were as a consequence of public-private participation utilizing some of the basic concepts. Some of the tested sources of funding, public funding for investments and for infrastructure improvements in Miami include municipal bonds. Municipal bonds. That has always been the primary source of public or private funding. We sell bonds to the public, which is just a loan from the private sector to the government, right? At predetermined interest rates that is indexed to inflation, so that you can get a full measure of your revenue at the end of the period, the asset investment period. So, however, there is a great advantage in municipal bonds. They are tax deductible. That's why you see a lot of pension funds are investing in municipal bonds, and a lot of insurance companies are investing in municipal bonds. I will give you examples of some of the projects that we've just finished and the ones that are in process today. You can also utilize trust funds. You can use grants for those who want to give you grants. Usually they come in trickles. They don't really are not major sources of funding. Of course, the go-to place is the general funds, which is taxes and assessments, fair usage charges for municipal services. Non-ad valorem investments. These are fees that you generate by delivering municipal services such as solid waste, collection and disposal, your fire department, the fire rescue department, police services, they generate revenue, so you might know, especially for those who have run a red light or been engaged in any kind of traffic infractions. You have library fees, you have children's trust and hospital trust. Now we create what we call a local taxing district. These are small, miniature collection of areas which Nigerians sometimes call housing estates, which can create their own school board, water management district, and sewer and storm water utility outfits, and they generate funds, and they are required to plug that into enhancing the utilities within the boundaries of the special local taxing authority. Of course, you have taxation, which is nobody likes taxes, right? But it is a source of revenue. And you have licensing. Everything you do, you must pay a licensing fee, even for you to vend your products. So we have what we call a business tax receipt, vending fees, as well as permit fees for a general construction. When I go to Nigeria, I see heavy-duty trucks, what we call tandem trucks, plying the public highways. And there are no weigh bridges on the interstates to weigh them and for you to charge them appropriate fees because of the impact they create on the public infrastructure. So here you see them that they are required a driver is not required to drive more than 48 hours without having a 48 hours break. So once you ply on the public highway, you always have a way to step out of the highway, go through a weigh bridge, and they estimate the impact based on your tonnage, and there is a fee that is assessed to you. Of course, tolling on the highways. Then you have the local option gas tax. What is a local option gas tax? These are fees that federal government allows local cities to charge for every gallon of gasoline that is sold within their locality. And that fee is strictly used to enhance and improve public highways and transportation corridors. And we do have asset recycling. So I'm going to go to, these are the basic ones. There are a lot more, which are really don't generate more than a few $1 million in a fiscal year. So I want to focus on some of these. So what are the municipal bonds of interest? Municipal bonds are usually government-backed and issued bonds. The issuing entity, which is the city or the county or the state, places full faith and credit in paying back purchasers of the bond that will be used to finance infrastructure capital expenditures, CapEx. There is no tax increase on this. There is no tax commitment. It's free. Once you buy the bonds, whatever revenue you get on an annual basis, you don't pay taxes on those. And these are debt funds or loans borrowed against future revenue streams. Interest rates are tax exempt, like I said earlier. And municipal bonds are usually bifurcated into two types: general obligation bonds and special obligation bonds. What is the difference between the two? The GOB is used for non-revenue generating projects. Non-revenue generating projects. These are those social projects like schools, parks, hospitals, and the rest, or governmental facilities, such as stadiums as well. What are they? They are usually repaired using general funds, which is typically sourced from ad valorem taxes. Most people in Nigeria don't pay property tax. That is a big investment hole. If you see, I'm going to show you shortly how much we generate from just property taxes in the city of Miami, right? And based on the real value of the property and goods and services. What are the special obligation bonds? These are revenue bonds. These are specific projects and programs that generate income and that can be used to plow back into their improvements. They might include tolls on your highways, fair usage charges, as well as fee billings from utility services. What are the fair usage charges? You have the passenger facility charges at the airports, at the seaport, and the rest, and also other places of public assembly. In terms of municipal bonds, I've already dealt with some of these in terms of ad valorem and non-ad valorem. Currently, City of Miami has just floated a $400 million general obligation bond. And this is a breakdown of the general obligation bond. We have targeted a few important corridors that needed a couple of improvements up to the tune of $23 million, right? It's going to be flown by a general obligation bond. The good thing about these bonds is that there is no impact on taxation of any individual. You don't see any tax increases on your tax bill on any annual basis. Life goes on, but the construction continues. If you've traveled recently, you constantly see improvements on most of our cities, roadways, and you keep asking, where's this money coming from? It's coming from your pocket. But that's a great advantage to you because we floated the bonds, we bought into it, and the money is being used constructively for improvements that will benefit you, but you get an interest back to you, which is a good investment strategy For parks and cultural facilities, we budget about $78 million to build a new park that will be innovative and also a cultural facility attached to it. We're trying to build a new fire station close to the new Miami Freedom Park. For those who don't know, the new Miami Freedom Park is the location for Inter Miami Football Club, which is the newest soccer club outfit that is going to be based in Miami in the last few years. Of course, we know who is the best player in the world today, who's coming to play in Miami, Messi, for those who don't know. So Messi has joined Inter Miami FC. So we're trying to build a new stadium where they will be playing, and we're building a new fire station for them at the cost of $7 million. Now, one of the biggest challenges of Miami is that we are ground zero for sea level rise. So we're trying to engage in what we call preliminary mitigation efforts for flood control. We're budgeting $192 million. This is a precursor to a bigger project that is coming in the plans now. The United States Army Corps of Engineers is coming with a $6 billion investments in addressing the shorelines of the city of Miami. $6 billion. And it's going to be a tripartite commitment. City of Miami, the county of Miami-Dade, as well as state of Florida and the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's really 4 ways. The reason why we call it tripartite is simple. The funding mechanism of the $6 billion is going to be split, 60% by the federal government through the Army Corps of Engineers. The remaining 40% is going to be split between the state of Florida and the local government. The local government is divided into the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County. All 3 entities are going to split the funding mechanism for that. And we're reserving $100 million of the $400 million for affordable housing. What is affordable housing? Everyone in Nigeria wants to build their own home. Nothing wrong with that. We call it the American dream. You must own your own home. But what about those who cannot afford it? That's what we call affordable housing. How do we deliver affordable housing? You create a delivery mechanism where developers are given incentives to build their properties, right? You could be a high rise of up to 60 stories, perhaps 200 units. So affordable housing is that the local government commits to the cost of you adding an additional 20% extra units on your development, and those units will be sold below market rate to people who qualify. And who qualifies? Usually people who earn their annual salaries is below a certain threshold. And usually those are workers. So we have workforce housing and we have affordable housing. Another general obligation bond that the city of Miami, in consultation and collaboration with Miami-Dade County, delivered is Miami Loan Depot Park. This is a $634 million project with bonds that were financed over 40 years. So we started in 2012. We sold the bonds in 2008. So for the next 40 years, folks are going to get their money back with interest. And the money was used to develop this park. For those who've been in Miami recently or in the past 10 years, the Loan Depot Park used to be called the Marlins Stadium, which is the home of the Major League Baseball for Miami Marlins. About a month ago, I was at this stadium to watch Nigerian musical artists play here. I think it was Burna Boy and some other ones who played here about a month ago. The stadium is 37,000 seat capacity with retractable roof. One of the few stadiums that is air conditioned. And it had this roof span is 560, retractable on tracks. Approximate size of the location is about 2 football fields in length, which is about 5.27 acres. It takes about 15 minutes or so to close and open the roof. And also it has 4 parking garages. If you look at my cursor, this is 1, 2, 3, and the rest is 4. So how do you generate revenues here? There are concessions in the stands. You cannot bring your food, water, or anything into the stadium. You have to purchase from them. And these things cost really big. So government has a way of facilitating some of these social projects without touching the tax base or revenue stream of the city, simply by selling bonds and use the proceeds to develop infrastructure. So I don't know why Nigerian government builds stadiums, build infrastructure, and they use their own money. There's something we call OPM, other people's money. Government loves it, and we take great advantage and great pride in utilizing the other people's money to develop infrastructure at great benefit to the public, accessible to the public for use and enjoyment, then pay them back over a long period of time. But then they don't pay taxes on the income earned, which is a good advantage. It's a win-win situation for both sides. You have the Port of Miami. For those who've been to cruising, Miami is considered the cruise capital of the world. We built the Miami Access Tunnel at $1.1 billion. It was completed in 2014. Actually, at that time, I was the director of public works for the city. It was built via a public-private partnership program, a P3, as a design, build, finance, operation, and maintenance contract. It has a 35-year concession agreement. So the concessionaire is going to recoup their costs in 35 years. Imagine the Nigeria or a combination of states building such an infrastructure by taking their own revenue to build it. You don't do that. Use private money. Have people buy into it. Even if you have leakage holes in your financing program, which is everybody is very much aware of in Nigeria, you can still structure a deal that can preserve their investments without them losing any kind of value and still deliver the product for the public good and have a payback for everyone that is involved. So you have the Port of Miami tunnel. The project includes 2 tunnels. For those who've been in Miami recently on a cruise, you exit the I-95 or I-395, which is Interstate 95 or 395, go through the MacArthur Causeway, and you get into the tunnel. The tunnel is a little less than a mile long. It's simply an access tunnel. It's about 41 feet in outside diameter and 15 feet inside diameter. Both tubes, 4,200 feet long, with a depth of 120 feet below water. You know, Miami is surrounded by water. So the 3 public sponsors of this project was Miami-Dade County, the State of Florida Department of Transportation, which is in the middle here, and the City of Miami here. So our 3 governmental agencies pooled their resources together. How did we generate the money to pay for this? We just simply floated bonds. That's what the city did. The Florida Department of Transportation had revenue stream that they can always tap into. So they don't float bonds. But the City of Miami floated bonds to cover its own fair share contribution to the investment portfolio. Always a focus on generating funding through bonding. So we have the Kaseya Arena. Every lover of basketball must have seen this image. This is the NBA team Miami Heat Arena in my downtown Miami, close to my office, about 4 blocks away. It's formerly known as American Airlines Arena or FTS Arena and Miami-Dade Arena. Why did the name change in a 10-year period? I tell you why. We always, as soon as we finish social projects, we do naming rights. If you want your name to be on the body of that big asset as its own name, you must commit to heavy payments. FTX paid us $117 million. For how long? For 5 years. What happened? We structured the deal in such a way that there is a default clause. If you ever engage in any type of financial malfeasance or misfeasance or any type of infraction of the investment laws by the SEC rather, you are going to pay a penalty. And that penalty was prepaid. It was, I think it was $22 million they paid. The deal was structured a year ago. Of course, you know the history of FTX. The company got into a corporate fight and lost their licensing because of what? Because they were engaged in criminality. So the arena seized the $22 million and scrubbed their name off the edifice and awarded it to Kaseya at a new $117 million contract. So within a space of 10 years, you've generated close to $150 million only on naming rights. So naming rights are usually bragging rights for the entity whose name is on the edifice, right? You want to go Miami and watch Miami Heat Arena play basketball. Of course, unfortunately, we lost the championship this year. Where do you want to say you're going? You're going to the Kaseya Arena. So it's a public advertisement for the corporate entity that has its name on it. The stadium has about 2,100 club seats, 80 luxury seats. These are high-paying suites where corporate entities also emblazon their name on, and 76 private boxes for the fat cats. It also has Florida's largest theater in terms of public presentations. The $213 million was financed through general obligation bond. Not a dime came from the public tail. And folks who invested on it are getting their money back. It's been in operation in the past 11 years and is doing fantastically well. Now, we have a whole bunch of GOB projects we call Building Better Communities. What are those? Those are small little projects that had been combined into one entity, and the bond was floated as Building Better Communities. Now, what are the special obligation bonds, which I talked about, that are tied specific to one revenue source? We have the Miami Marine Stadium. This is a stadium that is built on water. I forgot to attach the photograph, right? We are rehabilitating it with $45 million. Everything is done on floatable piles, including we have rock bands, music concerts, you have all types of activities and events going on in it. And we have the new Miami-Dade County Courthouse at $263 million. This project is ongoing. We floated a bond as well. You have the Miami International Airport, North Terminal Development at $2.9 billion. That project was a project from evil. We call it project from evil because of cost overruns. But it kind of redeveloped in the Miami International Airport. If you've been there recently. All these bonds are to be repaid by specific revenue sources. Now, I want to touch base on something from supranational financial institutions. There seems to be a clamor to go to China and collect loans and build stuff. Very dangerous. Why? There is an unbalanced risk allocation. An unbalanced risk allocation, what we call the fine print. That's why most countries outside Africa don't touch it. But there is an advantage though. If you're able to get an investment manager that can guide you, that is a great source of funding for any project you're going to do. So the Chinese loans are great. They watch for the unbalanced risk allocation. That's all I can say for now. So are there private sector initiated financing sources? Yes. They come to us through a mechanism we call unsolicited proposals. The private sector will identify a project within your governmental boundary and pitch that project to the local government. We call unsolicited proposal. The procurement rules is kind of structured differently for unsolicited proposals because of proprietary information that is contained in those unsolicited proposals. They come in, they lay out the framework of the deal. They're going to fund it for a specific period with payback period as well and tax incentives, but they don't want you to go through a public procurement process. But there is a fairness attached to it. Once we receive it, you pay us, I think it's about $250,000, depending on the complexity of the project, and down to a minimum of about $25,000 for review purposes. That's revenue for the city. Once we find the project credible, valuable, and of interest, what do you do next? You preserve the unsolicited proposal. You don't disclose it to the public, but you advertise that project so that there is fairness for other folks who might be interested in delivering the assets. Based on the responses from those unsolicited or from those IFP, then you can compare with the unsolicited proposal. Usually the unsolicited proposal is always better because they've done their homework before disclosing it. So where do they get their funding from? From private mutual funds, from institutional investors like insurance portfolios, from pension funds, financial instruments and debt and equity portfolios. So these are some of the things that developers use to generate funds and do public infrastructure development with a payback period. Not a dime comes from public revenue stream, not a dime comes from the budget. So you continue to reap the fruits of what we call prudent policymaking and delivery of public services at no cost to the government or to its citizens. Are there concepts and tools for new development from private sector expectations and participation? The biggest thing that I wanted to touch today is the concurrency requirements in land use. This is totally missing in most places I've traveled to in Nigeria. I've lived in many places in Nigeria over my life. Concurrency requirements is a gaping hole in land development. What are the private sector participation models? You have a special taxing district, you have the business improvement districts, you have the community redevelopment agencies, you have the downtown development authority, You have a rapid transit zone and a transit-oriented developments. These are private sector initiated models that can generate funding and focus only on a small segment of a city, usually between maybe 1 or 2 mile radius, and develop that core area at no cost to the public, but enhancements in public infrastructure and access within that area. Because they are looking for a tax incentive. Nobody wants to pay taxes, right? So what do? You plough your money or your funds, develop public infrastructure, generate revenue for yourself, and preserve that revenue from further taxation until for maybe 20, 30, 40 years. So that's why you keep asking, why are people becoming millionaires? You got to use your sixth sense and use your money to get you good money. A special taxing district requires the entity or the organization that is floating it to conduct a referendum of residents within that boundary to determine if it's warranted. If people say they don't want it, they don't want it, right? Because it's going to cost them initial capital outlay. So it requires levies. So you got to levy yourself special assessments to support the necessary services. All this is just for you to get enhancements within your area of domicile. That the title for those capital improvements that you're going to do will rest with the government. It doesn't belong to you, but you take ownership and pride in terms of creating it and limiting the use within your area of domicile. So usually, it might require additional enhancements in police presence within your area, or maybe fire services, or solid waste collection services, or commercial security guard service, or street light enhancements. I've listed quite a few areas in Miami that currently utilizes this. These are some of the things that the so-called gated communities in Nigeria should focus on to create a special taxing district, because the money you invest in this, right, enhances your neighborhood, and you collect tax incentives by doing it. I know most people don't pay taxes. Let's be frank about it. Most people don't pay taxes in the US, and it's even worse elsewhere. I'm not going to name names. So in Miami, you have the Morningside area. What did they do? It's a gated community. They created a special security guard to patrol their area. Bay Heights have a additional enhancement in police presence. And Garden Hills have a landscape and tree maintenance for beautification programming. The Hammocks area, where I live, has street lights, drainage, roadways, landscape, security guard programming. And of course, we pay assessments on a monthly basis. Then you have the design district. If you've been to Miami, the design district is where to go and shop. As long as you have a deep pocket, that's where you get all your Rolex watches and all the enhancements, Gucci and the rest. What are the business improvement districts? We have quite a few of them. In the United States, we have over 1,000 business improvement districts. These are specific areas within the central business districts where businesses commit to enhancements within their business district. Only for businesses. It requires involvement of themselves in making policy, driving policy, and implementing policy, because everybody likes freedom. So you create a dedicated funding for neighborhood improvements, and it funds market projects, special events, beautifies the streetscapes, makes capital improvements, collects and disseminates economic development research. I've given you a couple of websites that you can use if you want to champion the creation of a business improvement district. There are advantages in creating business improvement districts. Oftentimes, you get free money from the government to supplement what you are doing, because you have to recognize that folks are making additional efforts. So again, in neighborhood revitalization, which is different from the business improvement, these are property owners are now involved in revitalizing their neighborhoods. It's usually for artistic and innovative projects to create pedestrian-focused streets. Right now, the central corridor of Flagler Street in Miami is being reconstructed into what we call a festival street. So you restrict vehicle access, but you beautify the area. It's going to be almost in the same image as if you've been to the 16th Street corridor in Denver, Colorado. That's the way it looks, where there are no vehicles, but there's always what we call a streetcar for those who are physically challenged that might not be able to walk the entire distance. The community redevelopment area agencies, these are usually entities that are created based on tax increment financing. So what you do is that if there are areas I'll give you one example that can do with a CRA in Nigeria. Ajegunle in Lagos can do with a CRA. What is it? Government goes in there, determine the baseline taxation level as of today, and now propose that anything over and above that from today, when we establish the CRA, we go into the CRA coffers for them to use in economic development, infrastructure improvements. Those who drive the process are usually businesses. What do? They first of all, before they create a CRA, they engage in massive real estate acquisition. They start buying people out, just like Walt Disney did in the 60s when he created Disney World. You first start by buying people out. Nobody knows why you're buying land, and you're buying it over market value. So there's an incentive for people to sell. Once you accumulate enough real estate, then you apply for a CRA within that whole area. Government usually says yes, because the taxation level at that point is very low. They agree. So anything raised over and above the baseline belongs to you. Then they start doing massive development in that area using other delivery methods, right? They can bond it themselves, or they can go to the fund market and generate revenue, or generate funding to finance this. And the tax increment goes to the CRA, and the CRA uses to manage that area. It's a creative way of creating your own small miniature city that you can control. So I sue and I encourage those who have money to look into creating community redevelopment agencies within their area, right? They are established for purposes of carrying out redevelopment activities that will eliminate slum and blight. Okay, so these are mechanisms that are of interest. Of course, the Downtown Development Authority within Miami area and elsewhere in major cities are usually majorly composed of private sector entities. In Miami downtown area, the 15-member board comprises of only 3 people from government and 12 who are private sectors. They collect tax increment as well. They focus in the downtown area. What do? They set policy for implementation of multidisciplinary engagements to promote economic health and vitality. So this is also another business model. I'm going to, at the end, leave my contact in case you want to engage further in some of these business models and development models so that I can guide you and provide you tools. The transit-oriented development is something that developers use around major transportation hubs because you are bringing people out to aggregate at those transportation hubs. Developers have now focused on those hubs to develop what we call mixed-use development, which is high-density development, where a proportion of it is for commercial and the remainder is for residential units or condo units. And of course, because it's close to a major transportation hub, most of the densities and planning requirements are waived because you are creating something that is out of the ordinary, and because you are going to utilize what we call last mile transportation opportunities or options like micro mobility. So we eliminate parking garages for them, which is a major savings in terms of development cost. And people tend to love it, and they create these TODs everywhere today. So right now in Miami, the TODs are areas within half a mile corridor at the transportation hub. And developers are taking opportunities of these waivers of zoning requirements to concentrate their major asset development within those transportation hubs. Where would be a transportation hub in Nigeria? Perhaps closer to the airports, perhaps closer to the seaport in Lagos or Calabar or Port Harcourt or Warri, or perhaps even at the train stations, which is usually what you're doing within urbanized centers, at the train stations, and also at major intersections of interstate highways. So TODs allow mixed-use development at those transit systems and to generate revenue. And most of the extra units, you can take advantage of that to focus on affordable housing and workforce housing. You can have hotels, commercial development. Those zoning requirements will be waived for you if you are going to provide public benefits. What are the public benefits? Affordable housing is a public benefit. You can also create perhaps a police department. You can build their infrastructure. You can build a fire station. Those are additional public benefits. Or you can even donate money to the government to focus on providing affordable housing or address homelessness. So these are some of the public benefits advantages of engaging in transit-oriented development. A developer came in the other day and advised us that they're going to provide us extra Fundn trolleys for public transportation at no cost to the city, plus affordable housing, plus a fire station. And I was like, what is in it for you? Then I realized what it was. It was what we call a Superfund site, which is an environmentally impaired development site. So he wanted the city to waive the requirement of development because the site is at a prime real estate. So, which was why he threw in a lot of sweet public benefits deals into it, and he was successful. But then look at what the city is going to get in return. So there are some of these options that people should look into. Keeping your money in toilets or in septic tanks is not the way of the future. Invest, invest, and invest. So you're going to reap the benefits of investments. Don't be too quick in looking for the value payback to be within a couple of years. Stretch it out. Typically, you can stretch it out for 20, 30 years. Even though you might be in your 70s or 60s, you feel, oh, am I going to live that long? No. Bet you can do what we call asset management or private investments, where you tie it into a trust fund. And that trust fund continues to pay and continues to pay and continues to pay for whoever is the beneficiaries that you want to designate. You can designate your family, you can designate perhaps one of the nonprofits, you can designate a religious organization, you can designate your alma mater. These are some of the things you can do to generate revenue for yourself, for your family, as well as help the less privileged. Now, the big elephant in the room, public-private partnerships. Everybody seems to know this, so I'm not going to dwell too much in terms of the basic definition of P3s. But we've generated a lot of P3s. I've already worked on some, so I'm going to give you specific examples of some P3s that we're currently working on. The Miami Freedom Park, which I had mentioned earlier, is a $1 billion pending investments that the city is working on. Now, we're working with a private sector group, the folks that bought the franchise for Inter Miami Football Club. It's a very big family in Miami here, but they've cornered some investment portfolios and financiers to join them in creating what they call Inter Miami Concessionaire. It's going to be a home stadium, parking garages, a hotel. Of course, there's a lot of garages that have mixed use, which is in terms of affordable housing and condo units that they're going to sell. You have the new City of Miami building, which is $293 million. It's also a P3, it's also pending. For those who visited me in my office before, we are going to move out of that facility into this new place. Why did we do that? That's what we call air rights, which means if you have like a 10-story building, which is what my office is, and the zoning designation of your development site allows you to build up to, say, 50 floors, and you're currently at 10. So the net, which is the delta of additional 40 stories, you're not utilizing it. So you have two options. It's either you do what we call a TDD, which is transfer of development density, to another site, and they pay you cash. But then it restricts your site, that your site cannot be developed again beyond that level it is. Some people sell their air rights. Some other ones, what they do is what we've done here, sell the entire development site so that somebody can build up to the maximum that has been zoned for. So in exchange, the revenue we are generating by that asset swapping is what is going to fund this project. So you see how we are moving to a new, brand new site of 20 floors at a less dense area, right? And give up what we have today at no cost to ourselves. So we'll get more square footage, we'll get more room for offices and general growth at no extra cost to the city. Then you have the new Miami-Dade County Courthouse, $263 million. Why? The existing courthouse, great facility, it is too old. It was built in 1926. That courthouse was where Al Capone was jailed finally, for those who know who Al Capone was. And we feel that that courthouse has exceeded its useful life. So it's time for it to go. So what we did was to get a P3 partnership with a GOB, which means we are bundling the cost. And the Miami Tunnel, I've already discussed the Miami Tunnel and the MIA and Kaseya Arena. Are there alternatives through the P3 program that people are not actually looking into today, right? You have project bundling. You might say, I want to do Enugu Onitsha Expressway, Enugu Port Harcourt Expressway, or Lafayette to Abuja Expressway. You can bundle 3 of them together as one P3 and give it out, right? Because if you give them out individually as P3s, no investor will touch it because they look at it and say, wait a minute, guys, I don't see any financial health in engaging in that P3. So project bundling is also one of the solutions to engaging in P3 and get interested investors to key into it. Then you can also create regional P3 centers. Don't dwell on one. Right now, Nigeria everybody's talking about ICRC all the time. I said, why does the guy in Abuja has to determine what the guy in Obamashaw has to do? But you call yourself a federal government. Why don't you decentralize your P3 programming? Your revenue stream in Abuja is not the same in Obamashaw, and it's not the same in Daura. Your revenue stream has to be tied to geography or asset type. So you have to begin to decentralize your asset management programming so that asset tolling and revenue generation will not be the same everywhere. Because a federal P3 center is usually a bottleneck of partisanship. Canada has a decentralized P3 programming. You have Infrastructure Ontario, you have Partnership BC. Of course, the UK has their own programming. So you may want to create a mini ICRC programming in Nigeria to take advantage of the disparity in the revenue stream as well as the special unique needs of the locations. So this is the biggest elephant in the room right now for me. I've shown a picture of myself when I was at a project site looking at what's going on in Las Vegas. So the realities of a true federal system is that the inefficiencies of completely devolving decision-making and financing to the states and local level is imperative and it's really needed, because the reality is that infrastructure does not artificially obey boundaries. So governmental boundaries it's not sensitive to the needs, the infrastructure needs of the populace and the public, right? So it is suggested that infrastructure development on a regional basis be optimized, amplified, and implemented. In the US here, you have the Tennessee Valley Authority that generates electricity for 7 states. You have the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, with revenues generated that fund additional airports, and it's owned by 2 states. So you begin to see that regionalism is great. In South Florida, where I work and operate, transportation is a regional venture. Water and sewer treatment facilities and supply, regional facilities, right? And why do you want to decentralize that? Because of the opportunities of large-scale development for regionalism. So we created one water and sewer department for the entire 35 cities with the counties, 35 cities and the county, so we call it a 35 governmental structure. So we have one body, everybody keys into it, but you don't roll it up to the state level or federal level. It's only for that area. So if you were to go to Abuja, have one centralized power generator. It's been done already. I think Nigeria is on the threshold of doing this through the taking things out of the exclusive list and putting them into the concurrent list. This is long overdue. And there needs to be, folks need to ramp up the programming implementation. So what are we doing in Miami in terms of the Tesla program? So Miami is looking at a way to transform itself. So I was tasked to generate a template for that. I engaged a consultant. So I looked at what Tesla is doing in Las Vegas. What is it? The way you have a network of roads and streets, we want to create a second layer of that by putting them underground. How do you do that? Tunneling, right? So we have to engage only, in order to minimize implementation costs, we looked into only electric vehicles to minimize the cost of construction, because you don't have to generate ventilation system to the extent if you were to bring gas-guzzling vehicles into the tunneling, right? Based on the experiences we had in the Miami Access Tunnel to the seaport. So this is myself. Las Vegas Convention Center already done one. So we went there, myself and my public works guy, and myself again with him, looking at the tunnel boring machine quarter head that was used to generate that tunnel. We drove into it. I did what I call a pilot study right there on the spot. I said, okay, guys, let us drive through the tunnel from point A to point B. from between two locations and let somebody else drive on the streets. Let's compare arrival time. We got there at half the time it took the guy on the street to get. Now, imagine if you create a new network. It's going to be a multi-phase development effort. If you were to replicate your city network below grade, perhaps over a 10, 20, 30, 50-year period, right? You've solved your transportation needs. Traffic impacts is going to be completely addressed, right? Now, most of the electric vehicle manufacturers today, like Tesla, General Motors, Ford, Honda, and the rest, they are insisting that for them to agree to such transportation programming, which I call a paradigm shift, that they must have the right of first refusal. For the first 50 years, it's only public transportation system that will utilize those tunnels. So what does that mean? If I buy an electric vehicle today, I shouldn't be allowed to operate it in the tunnel. I have to use the public transportation system, which they will be the ones providing. Not just them, any major manufacturer of. So this is a way for them to ensure that there is a market for them, for themselves. So how will you deliver such a project? You create it through bonding, general obligation bond, right? You create the program, people buy the bonds, you develop it, there's a payback time, it doesn't impact the government budget. That you solve a major transportation challenge, you address traffic congestion on the streets, and you create a safe environment for people to move on. So this is a major milestone. So I was really impressed when I delivered the reports to the governmental governing body, the legislative body, and we're looking into creating what we call a public-private partnership project out of this. Now, I've talked about the supranational loans, to be careful with unbalanced risk allocation for debts and political blowbacks. So the fair usage charges, if you're in transportation or you're in water development or you're in sanitary sewer or in solid waste, sustainable revenues through fair usage charges are usually your primary source of revenue generation, which can be plugged back for new asset developments through regular tolling, express lane premium tolling, which is where you have a reverse tolling based on use, perhaps during the rush hours of the day. Again, you have the dynamic pricing, which is timed. It goes over and above the peak, both the basic rates. What are the gas tax? I touched about this before. This is something that Nigeria can utilize to check the exportation of your petroleum products outside the country. Because if you pay taxes on the gasoline and you're exporting it out, it increases in cost, right? There is asset recycling, where if you demolish one, you can sell the asset and use the proceeds to go develop a new facility. Of course, base utility charges are some of the things that has to do with water and wastewater rates and passenger facility charges. So why does the private sector need process improvement? Because it's key for business development and project deliverables. Everybody in business knows that time is money. So municipal impacts on business viability demand that our development is given a prime of place. I strongly recommend that this body begin to look into new regulations to adopt that will streamline their permitting process in order to key into some of these new development concepts and models to deliver assets. You may want to address those regulatory impacts through approaches that are site-specific. Don't adopt a one-size-fits-all concept. It must be site-specific, development-oriented, and results in new municipal revenue streams. My biggest love today is concurrency and land use. This entity, I believe you guys visited a couple of locations in the last few days. There was a Chinese, I don't want to call it what we call it in the US here. We call it a Chinese drywall. Let me say that. Let me be honest. Call it Chinese drywall. There are challenges to it. And also there was a flooding in some area yesterday, which is as a result of lack of concurrency in land use development. So what is concurrency? Concurrency is one of the goals of growth management. It refers to the timely provision of public facilities and services related to the demand for them. To maintain concurrency means that adequate public facilities are in place before new development is allowed to occur within a specified time period. You cannot build if they are not public facilities. The reverse seems to be the case today in most developing countries. Development happens, then we start crying that government didn't bring facilities. So work that way, you are placing the cart before the horse. So to maintain concurrency, there must be adequate public facilities in place, or there is a realistic plan to have it in place concurrently with the developments that it's going to serve. So no construction or building permits are issued if public facilities are not in place. Concurrency is the responsibility of the developer. So, however, if public facilities are already been built, perhaps through government effort or a prior developer, the new developer is assessed an impact fee as cost recovery. So you're not going to get it out of free, right? There is a timeline, there is a finite period you are allowed to recover impact fees. So what are the specific areas where we allow general concurrency, right? Is in transportation facilities. Obviously, if you're building a massive, perhaps like a hotel or real estate, which we call gated communities and housing estates and the like, you are creating a lot of impact on public transportation facilities, such as road and mass transit. Parks and recreation has to be in place. We have a rule in Miami. There must be a park, public park, within a 10-minute walk. So it's either a regional park, neighborhood park, or what we call a pocket park, which is maybe a standardized public site, which is a residential site of 50 by 100. There must be those pocket parks within a 10-minute walk of every location, which is also a public benefit that we create. And of course, there is also impact on public safety for police and for fire rescue and for general services. The final one is school concurrency. Public law today requires availability of public schools and adequate capacity as prerequisites for approving new residential plots and subdivision site plans. You're not going to go build a new housing estate in Mararaba or somewhere in Abuja if there's no school. If kids are going to be there, or people who buy properties there are going to move in, where would their kids go to school? So these are some of the concurrency requirements you have to put in place, and developers have to pay for them up to a certain level. And I'm going to show you shortly. So there are two basic things I just mentioned: impact fees and concurrency fees. Impact fees are where the public infrastructure is already in place and you're impacting on it, so you pay an impact fee. Concurrency fees is where the public infrastructure is not in place and you are required to either develop it or contribute to its development. I'll tell you how you contribute. If the public transportation network master plan requires that you have a dual carriageway and you're building only on one side of the street, your impact is only on one side of the street, we will not require you to build both sides of the dual carriageway. Or multi-lane street, you build only on the side that they are impacting. We know you're going to impact on the other side eventually, but there are people who are going to develop on the opposite side of your site. So what government does is that we have two options. Either government raises private money through bonds and build the additional lanes and leave it for the next guy who is coming to pay their impact fee, or we simply rely on you to use concurrency and develop both sides, and whoever comes after you pays impact fee, and that's credited to the developer. And how do you credit to the developer? That's the question, because I might not own it eventually, right? So you place it against that folio number of that property. The property pays property taxes every year. So there is a credit and offsets as time goes by. So these are some of creative ways people see and they say, listen, it makes sense to develop in an orderly fashion. What types of projects assess these fees? New residential construction. They pay school impact fees, like I said, road impact fees and transportation concurrencies and park impact fees if plotting is required. Non-residential construction pay only road impacts. Interior renovation or change of use, such as you have a hotel and the guy comes after and wants to change it to condo units, then they pay the quality renovation or change of use. They pay road impact fee and transportation concurrencies. Now, remember, a project site location is the only determinant if it will assess a road impact fee or transportation concurrency fees. Affordable housing and certain social or governmental projects usually receive a waiver because they are public facilities for public use. You're not going to charge somebody who cannot afford a home, who is using affordable housing. You start charging that developer impact fee. The cost is going to be transferred to the eventual purchasers of that property, which are people on the lower rung of the social strata. If you demolish your structure within a time period, you have 3 years to claim a credit or any impact fee you've paid before. For example, you developed a property of 10 units, paid impact fee, you demolish the property and you want to build 20 units, you get a 10-unit credit of what you've paid before, so you only pay the delta. But you have 3 years to claim that credit. If you demolish it and leave it for 5 years, you're done. You must pay 20 units in the new application. School concurrency, if you are developing, let's say, a facility for assisted living facility for elderly people, you don't pay any impact fee because elderly people don't have kids of school age, so they don't pay school concurrency fee. So if you are building a hospital, you don't pay concurrency fee for schools because nobody goes from a hospital to school. So these things are tied to the type of development. So there are restrictions in place. And of course, public institutions, like government facilities, government offices, they have an exemption by law. I'm looking at during the heat of pandemic in 2020, the city of Miami collected $52.5 million only on impact fee. That was when construction was at its lowest end in the past 10 years. The reason I brought this up to show you that at the height of development period, at the peak, you collect multiples of this in the hundreds of millions. But this is a period where development was very minimal. We're still able to collect $52.5 million on impact fee. So in 2020, 2021, which is the same period, we were able to collect on taxes, franchise fees, and other types of fees, $877 million, right? What are franchise fees? Which is something very critical here. You have what you call electricity generating discos. You call them discos and generators and the distributors, right, in Nigeria. Are they paying franchise fees to the government? They probably are. Are you collecting at optimum? I don't know. But we do have, only within the city of Miami, you have one entity that will give a franchise fee for street lights and also to supply electricity to homes. But they turn around and pay us 22% of the gross receipts as franchise fees. You know what 22% is? That's a lot of money for development. So I encourage us to start looking into finding creative means of generating additional revenues by not letting the private sector take everything and pocket and walk away and go and stash it in a system or somewhere else without ploughing it back into the system. I know the challenges of underdevelopment. I know the desire of people to keep it for themselves and for their personal use. But when we begin to have this creativity in public sector financing of public assets, people will key into it. There are some of the basic utility fees that we charge, which I'm not going to dwell on, such as basic one is stormwater. If you develop a site, your private home, a public home, or perhaps a subdivision, which you call a housing estate in Nigeria, you are not allowed by law to discharge your stormwater into the public system. It must be retained on site, right? So these are opportunities. But if you want to tie into the public system, there is an annualized fee you must pay on a yearly basis. So these are additional revenue streams you can use. Of course, most commercial units pay what we call a stormwater utility fee, regardless of whether you have any type of private system within your boundary line. So what are my concluding notes on infrastructure financing? Why would the private sector lag in infrastructure investment in Nigeria or any developing country? Because these countries fail to identify infrastructure projects that are viable financially and that can be pitched to the private sector early. Here we have what we call a 5-year development plan, where we lay out all the projects we think we can deliver in the next 5 years. So we just finished what we call a public workshop, where all developers, investors, engineering and architectural firms, contractors came to look at the list and look at what are the initial scope of work. What are we hoping to accomplish? We want them to see and identify projects they want to key into and begin to seek opportunities to invest in them, either through a P3 or through bonding, and take them over. Sometimes we'll have, this private sector is looking for shovel-ready projects. What are these shovel-ready projects? These are projects that have been scoped, designed, permitted, but there's no money to construct them. Or they could be emergency funding opportunities. So the private sector is always looking for projects. They might run into money. And the guy says, woof, I got like $50 million or $100 million, a collection of investors, or perhaps a pension fund. Do you have a shovel-ready project? Yay. Can I take it over as a P3 or unsolicited proposal? They're available for you. So there is a lack of pipeline for those. So you want to create some of these opportunities and begin early to kind of socialize them, market them, or find a consultant that can look for developers. It doesn't have to be developers only from Nigeria. It can be from around the world. It could be your diaspora group. It could be your diaspora group. Those are folks looking to invest back home. That's what we call East-West. Home is the best, right? Wherever you live, home is always the best. So folks can say, okay, as a part of my retirement, let me take over one government project and invest in it and take over the revenue stream. Now, the biggest elephant in the room is lack of control. Everybody knows what lack of control is. Private sector will assist if political stability and fiscal surety exist, that capital investments are protected. This is the basic one. If you cannot answer and address this first bullet, you're not going to make any kind of impact in terms of private sector financing of public projects. There must be political stability. There must be fiscal surety that capital investments are protected. You folks need to think outside the box, and there must be law and order. There must be law and order. You cannot invest, and the next day, some judge in some remote location pronounces that that project is no longer yours. That is a wedge to any type of meaningful investment occurring in that environment. The investors are going to just pull out and leave. These are some of the basic challenges of underdevelopment. Financial viability is a problem because a project can become unviable due to leakage in the supply chain. Fund thefts. You invest, the money disappears. It's an impediment to financing and cost recovery. Nobody's going to engage in any of this. If some of these three things, there are so many, but those three, I believe, are the biggest challenges of lack of control in the delivery process. So, any questions? Thank you for listening. I hope I did not bore you too much, but I'm still available. I provided my contact information. Reach out to me either through LinkedIn or by email, and I can give you additional information on any of the subject matters of interest.
Thank you very much. We sincerely appreciate, sir. The technical secretary, please, can you coordinate the question and answer segment?
Yes, thank you, my chairman. Thank you, our presenter, Dr. Zerry Ihekwaba. So if there are any questions, kindly raise up your hand. If you have any questions, kindly raise up your hand.
Mr. Technical Secretary, I think there are a couple of questions on the chat already posted. The first question is from Dr. Emeka Abasi in Abuja. He is asking, what is the split between publicly funded regenerative projects and PPP in the city of Miami? I will give you one answer I will give everyone. There are no restrictions. We do not place any restriction. It's dependent on your interest. If you are interested in a particular project, right, go for it. We do not ab initio say that 60% should be PPP and 40% should be regenerated. No, it's open to the public. More so, the same entity can corner most of the projects as long as you have a viable pro forma and a viable business case. Nobody stops you from bidding to you. Remember, America is a free country. Whatever you want to do, you're free to do it. The only thing that we ask for is public procurement must follow procurement rules.
Okay,
The second question he asked is, what is the average tenure of PPP funded municipal projects? We aim between 30 and 40 years. I showed two examples. One was 30 years and the other was 40 years. Those are the two questions I saw on the chart.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Engineer Oricha. Please kindly go ahead with your question, man. Engineer Oricha.
Okay, thank you so much. I was trying to unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I want to really thank Dr. Zerry Ihekwaba for this wonderful sharing of his experiences in the city of Miami in the US. And listen, and I just feel sorry sometimes for our great nation that there are so many very talented, very gifted, very, upwards looking professionals here. And yet we are having a lot of challenges. Like what you have stated today, there's so many great opportunities in Nigeria for people to key into. But like you said, the prudent policy making that should encourage developers or investors is, I don't know, who should take charge of this? Because by what you have said, people are working behind the scene, ensuring that if I have 1 million naira, for instance, to invest, the money is not just going to be thrown in a notion that maybe someday it will just be swept away. Somebody should be behind the scene working and churning out policies that should encourage investors. And like you said, there should be, political stability, law and order that will ensure and encourage investors into, activities, developmental activities in Nigeria. So how do we get out of this issue of nobody owning anything or controlling issues? Because I know that, like you kept saying, some people kept their money, or unfortunately, maybe if his money worked for you, of course, you cannot just go and keep it in a one dustbin, a toilet somewhere. But some genuine people who have money and want to invest, but because of the challenges of no assurance of, getting return on your investment, people are keeping back. How do we get out of this? Can you advise us? Because engineers are here and somehow we're involved in one thing or the other that can maybe help, change our orientation to things in Nigeria. Thank you.
So without getting into partisan politics, right, which I guess your question is more like partisan politically challenging, I will tell you upfront, there are a lot of success stories today in Nigeria of investment in public assets. The unfortunate thing is that they are all privately owned and privately operated. But are successful. So I guess the hump is, how do you transition that success story into the public sector? If you look at my last slide, I said those controls are the impediments. You need political leadership. You need people with what we call cojones here in South Florida, people with real interest in delivering public service. Once you have a collection of strong investors who cannot be pushed over, pool their resources together, stop looking at federally operated infrastructure assets, regionalization. If you are in Lagos, focus on something that can provide service between Lagos and Ogun states. If you're east, start looking for resources that can address, for example, railway construction between Enugu, Aba, and Onitsha, with a spot of Oka and Abakaliki. And if you're able to pool resources, you can get outside help. Again, I mentioned in passing in one of my slides, your diaspora could also key in. Instead of putting all your money in 401k and in some of these investment portfolios abroad, if there's no financial funding theft or well-crafted partisan templates that were clearly created to pilfer your funds. If none of that exists, there are a lot of incentives to begin to engage in those small-scale public asset developments. People can put resources together and address solid waste management in Abia State. That's a niche. I'm glad Abia State government yesterday just published, is it yesterday? Yeah, no, yeah, 23rd. They published a new request for invitation for bids or request for qualification, asking people that are interested in such aspect of public service development venture. There are opportunities for success. We should stop folding our arms and saying government will not do it and start engaging in public service. The more people step back, you can work your way up, look at local governments, look at states. Everybody wants to go on the federal level, right? Luckily, there was a recent legislation that split or rather moved some of the public asset delivery or programming or what they call exclusive list. Some of the things on the exclusive were put on the concurrent list. So states can do it now, right? But you can engage at the state level and focus on regionalization. What starts Plateau State and Benue State to look at massive agricultural establishments. That area is fertile, right? They can look into that and create a project. State of Israel doesn't have clean water. They rely on salt water. Desalination is what they do, right? They look at agriculture there. So if you begin to do what they call finding the niche in your specific area, I don't even know why Rivers State government is not doing something that it should be doing, which is fisheries, right? Create a way to export some of the sea assets. You won't believe that in the United States, we still import meat from Europe, from South America, because the market is here. People import flowers that you know, rose flowers you give out to your loved ones. It's been imported from South America. There are weekly flights that come in, fresh rose flowers. So there are so many little things you can actually earn a hefty dose of revenue from. Would the government have the metal to open up the space? People out of fear and fright and concern don't venture. If you don't venture, you don't succeed. Begin to challenge the existing paradigm. And of course, sooner or later, you're going to make a huge success. Like I said earlier, I have my contact information on the screen. If you want me to link you up with some of these success stories or give you additional tools or a deeper dive, I'm always available.
Okay, we take the next question, Humphrey Okereke.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zerry. It's intriguing how you have a lot of recent details in Nigeria. That is to say, you have a massive interest in the progress of our country, our dear country. Just as you say, there's no place like home. Now, my question is direct. I would want to know, is there a coordinated front, a coordinated body from which you guys in the diaspora with this kind of bright input and abilities are able to make input into the policies and development of Nigeria? Because you see that whenever you go out of these shores, you see things working seamlessly and the way they see. And then you come home and it's a tale of woes. So is there any coordinated body that exists now or you could form to make interventions and input into how our country moves and develops? Thank you.
Well, I think there are a lot of Nigerians all over the world, including within the boundaries of Nigeria, that are patriotic, that still feel a sense of commitment, that Nigeria needs to be a success story, and they have all it takes to contribute to make it better. Listen, money is not everything about life. People earn a good living where they stay, and there's really no incentive for them to abandon what they're doing and go to Nigeria to assist. But there is this burning desire that Nigeria should not be moving backwards. There needs to be a way to make it better, right? You look at some of the countries of the world, even here in the States, right? I have people that go to Harvard and MIT come to interview with me, and I don't even find them with the requisite tools. And here I am, somebody who went to University of Nigeria and Nsukka, even though I went for further studies abroad, right? And I begin to see that Nigeria has a lot of prospects on the formation of platforms that can advance some of these models of asset development and financing. I've said it earlier and I keep repeating it. We need to tap into the talents that we have. I know people who work with major financing bodies in infrastructure financing who can easily open up doors, explain to you the pathway of success. But you need to do your technical scoping and business case study first. Develop and create believable reports and templates on how revenue stream can come in, and address those concerns in my last slide. Those concerns needs to be addressed, right? What are those concerns have to do with attracting financing from abroad? Because people don't want to venture into uncertain territories. But once I have, like engineering friends, I have companies that will be asking. Someone went on a vacation, not vacation, sorry, I take that back. It was part of the Federal Highway Administration technical group that went to Nigeria. He was one of my subordinates, an assistant city manager. He came back, Alberto Pahus. He says, Zerry, man, what the hell is going on in Nigeria? That place is great. I said, yeah, it's great for socialization, right? But it's not great for quality of life. It could be better. Every country had passed through the phase Nigeria is passing through now. Tomorrow is going to be better if there is concerted efforts to redirect and re-engineer the process of public service. You as professionals need to lead the charge. In your own little way, the principle of aggregate building is what leads to a wholesome product. Everyone seems to have thrown their hands up in the air and said, listen, forget it. No, within your own area of confine, create a success story. Look for opportunities of success. Insist on having business done in a most professional manner. If we all keep doing that, it aggregates together. At the beginning of my career, people said, wait, this guy is from Nigeria originally. The question was, yes, everybody came from somewhere. But what is going to matter is performance. And that's one thing that I noticed that is missing in Nigeria, right? Performance evaluation. Every year, everyone goes through a performance evaluation. Every year. If you have found that performance is receding, degenerating, obviously it's time for you to be asked to leave. So you have to be on your toes. Are we doing that home? Or are we relying on primordial interest to harness resources? That shouldn't be the case, especially in the engineering sector. There's a reason why the Faculty of Engineering in Nsukka is called Agbebi College of Education, was to recognize an individual who led one of the initial efforts. And that engineering faculty with a Yoruba name had its annual lecture as Herbert Macaulay lecture series, who is recognized as the first engineer to practice in Nigeria. We need to do things with nationalistic fervor. We need to do things that are meaningful, things that make everybody happy. Today, you go to every engineering school, it doesn't reflect the composition of the country, because people are afraid to venture out of their small of domicile because of we are all shifting backwards. That shouldn't be the case. When I went to school, the last deputy governor of Oyo State was my classmate. There are a couple of engineers in Kano who were my classmates. There were people from Plateau State. Everybody was having fun. We need to kind of expand our horizon and start looking at things from a purely altruistic manner. Look for solutions. Don't look for individuals. Look for solutions. When you start looking for solutions, it might become an individual that ordinarily wouldn't be looking at, and that will help you to facilitate what you're looking for. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I will take the last question, Engineer Imam.
Good afternoon, Dr. Zerry.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, thank you very much for your impactful presentation. Yes, I have a few questions, but first of all, what are the strategies of improving the P3 in urban utility services? Just the basic strategies, because we are yet to fully privatize some of our utilities, and you talked about unsolicited proposals. I don't know if our system is truly ready and functional to assess in terms of intellectual wise these things. I haven't gone in deep into the role of ICRC, but then I just wondered, because I am also a participant in the P3 Institute in Arlington, Virginia. I'm trying to find ways. I'm trying to, if you would advise ways in participation in urban utilities, basically PPP in urban utilities. I believe you understand the context or the situation in Nigeria, particularly Abuja. If I just want to hear your advice and strategies of going into that. What are the benefits, short-term benefits, really? Why I talk about short-term benefits is because of the nature of our financing. And then I also posted a question on their platform about the transaction advisors. Is it the concessionaire that appoints them, or both parties, or the public sector?
So if I may start from the last question, right? So
Yes,
we
sir.
always say that you have to put your skin in the game, right? What does that mean? If you're going to put money down, you need to have a key role to play. So financial advisors, both sides are usually advised to retain their own financial advisors, right? You cannot commingle upon financial advice, because whose fidelity is the financial advisor beholden to? It's to the client. So if you have both sides appoint the same individual, that's a conflict right there. So usually, if you are the investor, you have your own financial advisors. The government has its own financial advisors. And there is what they call a financial conference, where both sides lay out their claims and their expectations. And you find a way to find what is the middle ground in terms of delivery and in terms of good health and good faith. What we've done in the past is very simple, right? We create a yearly contract pool of financial advisors. So they're on standby. You don't start hurrying up to create one, right? So the investors that are of interest have done their own due diligence. They've had their own financial advisory processes, and they've established that there is an interest, one, two, that there is a possibility of having cost recovery, which is profit. They don't call it profit, they call it cost recovery for obvious reasons, because nobody wants to call anything profit.
Yeah.
So once you establish those two ground rules, then you begin to engage yourself in a conversation. Financial advice is usually one of your biggest impediments. You must utilize time, true and tested financial advisors, not fly by night. People who have done it before and people who have access to capital, those who have access to perhaps reliable investors, and those who have been exposed to the challenges of risk management. You must have those uppermost in your consideration. If you're able to find folks that have done international P3 projects, you always have a great advantage, because what those people that have international exposure will tell you. What I mean, the cost of money in Nigeria is high. Why don't we get you investors from our side? Then investors from our side are going to tell you, oh my God, that's a hostile territory. You might go in there and the money will disappear, right? So you see, it's almost like the case of chicken and the egg. You have to find a way to find a meeting point that is healthy, is reliable, and that has element of trust built into it. So I always advise folks, engage in people that have done it before, that have been successful in attracting funding and finance. If you look at behind my background is the great signature bridge that is coming up in Miami, right? This is fantastic. It's a P3 project. I didn't want to mention that for obvious reasons, because the city of Miami is not directly paying for the cost. You have to maintain confidentiality in some of these things you do. So that project is coming on stream. It's called, by the name itself, tells you the story of the bridge, signature bridge, right? It's in downtown Miami, across Biscayne Boulevard and US 1. It's going to straddle over a 4-mile period with 3 levels, right? And what did we in City of Miami do? We engaged with the state and said, can we utilize the underdeck, that's the bottom, the base, and create a linear park? And they agreed. So we are going to float a P3 project for that. And in terms of financial advisement, how do you do that for such project? Because it's a social project, there's no revenue that's going to come out of it. So you create a concession stance within that boundary so that people that rent out that space will pay into a trust fund, and that money will pay back on the cost of construction. So, and for you to get people that will buy into that, the Nigerian case is a special case because there are political considerations right there. There are political considerations. Let's face facts, right? How do you go around the political situation? You begin to look at the locals who have the gravitas, who have what we call the coyones. That's people who can withstand political pressure to buy in and key in into the project. Or perhaps be on the board of trustees that can preserve the trust. Once you get those people to key into the project, you begin to see success stories. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen in phases. Once you succeed in one project, you're bound to succeed in another. There are so many projects I can tell you that you can float today, even within the 50-something people that joined today, that you guys can constitute yourself into a group and create a project that can generate revenue for yourselves for the next 20 to 25 years. And you do what every successful investor would do. At the peak of your success, where the revenue is coming, you sell. Once you sell at a higher rate from your initial capital outlet, you generate your initial cost investment and you walk away free and you made your money. So guys, let's think outside the box. Nigeria is a great place to do some of these models and implement and deliver them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed this interaction. What a wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Zerry Ihekwaba. I want to sincerely thank you first for accepting to be our presenter for today. It was not easy tracking you because of your busy schedule, but we thank God you finally, gave us this opportunity, and we continue to engage you. I know after this presentation, you've sent your displayed your email, your contact. Many of our members will also engage you on a private, on personal note, on areas they would be interested in. Want to thank you, and want also especially thank some of your colleagues that joined us. I know you told me once during our conversation that you and Engineer Emeka Abwasi were schoolmates. And I'm happy to also see him join us today in this presentation. I want to especially also thank some of our senior colleagues that joined us, like as Engineer Oricha, who spoke earlier, Engineer Sanga, Engineer Nwafulugo is the rector of Oko Polytechnic, Engineer Francisca Nwafulugo. Thank you very much, Ma. And also I can see Engineer Osim, Vice President, Association of Professional Women Engineers of Nigeria, Engineer Danny Moore, and the executive committee members of the Nigerian Society of Engineers Abuja branch, and many of our senior colleagues who joined us. We want to sincerely thank you for making it a memorable day for us. And we pray that God will continue to bless Engineer Zerry. You've been doing a lot for the country, in as much as you are based in Miami. From time to time, state governments have been inviting you to come and give presentations in Nigeria and also offer solutions on how we could make Nigeria work. And I believe by God's grace, one day, Nigeria is going to work. So we thank you and we pray that God will continue to bless. I want to also thank, I saw Professor Akbuaka also who joined us. I want to thank you for joining us, and to all the participants, we say a very big thank you to you. God bless you and do have a very wonderful weekend.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, we'll talk.
Yeah.